Alright, so this is just going to be an update on my Elite Force Gen 5 G34 MOS off of CO2 mags. If I remember correctly, I'm not even going to try to remember correctly what I posted in my last video because this is such a Frankenstein build. But I believe the last video it was working okay, but I still had some slight issues. So I have put maybe 4 full mags through this, and it works fine. I've done a couple days of testing, function checking, and all kinds of fancy jazz, and I believe it is all set. It's all good to go. So I'm just gonna start going over it. So let me pop the slide off. And we'll start going over it. So the same thing, like I said last video, I believe. There's still a couple things I want to do. I want to get an upgraded steel 130% recoil spring and guide rod system. Right now it still cycles actually pretty well. I just want to try that recoil system out. But let's see, all the lower is where majority of everything has changed. The upper is still the same. It's pretty much all Gen 5 except for pretty much the nozzle. I took the CO2 nozzle. I took both the nozzles apart, and the CO2 nozzle did seem to have a different internal valve system and also a different spring. So I transferred that over. So this nozzle has all the Gen 4 CO2 parts in it, but other than that, it's the same blowback housing. They're both exactly the same. The hammer groups are, I don't know how, I don't know what exactly is different, but something about the hammer group with the Gen 4 was different. I tried using just the straight Gen 4 CO2 hammer group in here. It worked, but there was issues where when it would cycle, it wouldn't actually cock the hammer. For some reason, it just wouldn't cock the hammer at all. I would get 3-4 shots, it'd be good, and next thing you know, I have to re-rack. It was pretty consistent at about 3 to 4 shots, and I would need to re-rack it. So it wasn't just a little fluke thing. It happened a few times, whether it be actually dry firing with BBs, or even just cycling by hand. I would pull the trigger, cycle it 3 or 4 times, like cycle it, pull the trigger again, cycle it, pull the trigger again, cycle it, and then on the 3rd or 4th cycling of the slide, it would reset the trigger, but it wouldn't cock the hammer. So it was weird. So I put the Gen 5 hammer group back into it, and it seemed fine. The only issue was it was now light striking the magazines. Because these are CO2, these valves are under a lot of pressure. So a pain in the ass, especially with big chubby fingers. I had to take apart the hammer groups and actually swapped the hammer springs. By hand, they don't feel much different, but when I swapped it, I started getting full strikes of the magazine. So obviously that fixed it. This is obviously the old Gen 5 hammer spring meant for green gas. And inside the Gen 5, I now have the Gen 4 CO2 hammer spring. But something about the actual dimensions of maybe the hammer or the actual hammer group case or whatever, the housing, something was slightly different, causing it not to allow the hammer to stay cocked after cycling for some reason. So, but I haven't had any issues of that. Still have the Gen 4 trigger and the Gen 4 trigger arm or trigger bar. Here is where is it? I have it somewhere around here. Here. As much as I love this slide release or slide catch, whatever you want to call it, the extended one that comes on the G34. As much as I want to keep this, because the Gen 5 was meant for I don't know if you can be able to see that. Actually, you might be able to. You see that little circle? That's actually a spring. Unlike the Gen 4s, which use this lever type spring, not a wound coil spring. This spring would fit and it would kind of work, but then it would jump out of place because there wasn't actually being held in correctly by the lower frame rails, because the lower frame rails are now different. So it would fit, this would fit in, but it would have no spring pressure on it. So with the nice high recoil of CO2, it would jump up and lock the slide prematurely. Sometimes it would happen every single shot because the recoil would just cause it to jump and it would lock back. So what I did, because I'm using a Gen 4 trigger, which is slightly fatter, I wasn't able to use the ambidextrous safety because, well, here's the other side. So what I did was I cut it off because one, it was too narrow for the Gen 4 trigger. So basically cut one side off. So I still don't have ambidextrous safety, which I'm okay with. I'm not left-handed, but I still have a reliable slide release. So it's not the extended one, which I like, but it is now reliable. It has the spring in it. So that's all that really matters. So now I can do full mag dumps without it either locking back prematurely or sometimes not locking back at all because of just parts not working. So basically I just cut off the other side. What is that? Not that piece. I just had it. Oh, here it is. So I pretty much cut off the right side part. So if you see in here, if I get the light right, you still have the L shape that has a spring perch, and that allows it to stay. Now, as I'm fiddling with this, you see the coil spring that's underneath there for the slide release? There was also the same type of spring for the takedown bar. Now, not gonna lie, I took the takedown bar out and the spring went flying and I'm not looking for it. But the older Gen 4 and Gen 3s have a little spring steel bar, which you can see in there. If I can focus, you can see it in there now. For some reason, the Gen 5 lower frame rail section also allows you to use the Gen 3 and Gen 4 spring lever instead of the coil spring. So I was actually able to put that in. If you have it taken apart, if you look on the underside of the frame rail section, you will see a cutout for that piece of spring steel lever. It's I'm not even gonna try to draw it out. If you're going into that level of detail of taking apart your gun, you'll already know what it looks like. But it already has it cut out in the lower frame rail section. There's a little cutout and a section that will actually hold that in. So lucky for me, because that spring went flying. It's small and who knows where it went. So I got lucky. So like I said, I only put a few mags through it, but everything is functioning just fine. Locking back reliably, not locking back prematurely, not getting any more light strikes. I have no more trigger issues. So like I said, this is a Frankenstein build. I got chopped up Gen 5 parts, I've got Gen 4 parts, I've got Gen 4 springs, Gen 4 trigger, Gen 4 trigger bar, yeah, all kinds of Mod Podge parts. The slide, pretty much all straight Gen 5. The only difference is the nozzle, like I said, because I'm running CO2. If you're doing green gas, you don't have to go through so much trouble like I did, but not knocking green gas, but where I live, it gets cold, and second, I just like the little more of a kick that the CO2 gives you. Definitely more of a pain when reloading mags and refilling mags, but I'll love with that for the pistol, because when I draw my pistol, I want to make sure it shoots, and it shoots strong. I don't want to have to worry about a light gas strike or a low. I still sometimes have to worry about low gas in the mag with CO2, but usually when I pull this out, no matter what the weather is, I want it to shoot hard, and I want to shoot fast. So yeah. The only thing I changed since the last video is I still have the G17 length inner barrel. That's a straight swap. Still takes the same buckings and gas blowback inner barrel, so that was no issue. I still have to chrono it. Actually, I could do that right now. Just give me a second, but I have a Maple Leaf 60-degree bucking in there as well. I had